Once again, it's Gabe Morales with Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. Today we have a very special guest who is going to inform us about his career and some of the things he's doing. We have Mr. Kenneth Strange. He has over 20 years experience in law enforcement, and he had a top security clearance for most of that time. He is very excited to be here today, I'm sure. Welcome to the show. How you doing, sir?
Hey, pretty good, Gabe. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
All right, our pleasure. So let's get started there. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born and where were you raised?
Yeah, so I'm a New Yorker. I'm from this little place you probably have not heard of. It's called Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So I'm born and bred in Brooklyn. Went to elementary, started high school in Brooklyn, and at the age of 15, I moved out to Long Island, which is about 30, 40 miles east of Brooklyn.
All right. Very good. And then where did you go to college?
Went to school at a Jesuit college up in Syracuse called Lemoyne College. And I was a Spanish major, a modern languages major while I was there. I wrote for the school newspaper. I also took a junior year abroad with the Marquette University program and studied in Madrid, Spain for 1 year, which was, as a Spanish major, that was an exciting time for me. I didn't have much money, but I was able to get by.
Well, it sounds like that was a great experience and probably a good field to be in, especially because I see there behind you, it appears to be Los Angeles or Los Angeles. And I'm sure that comes in handy sometimes there.
Absolutely. I love speaking Spanish, and there's a lot of people here I can speak Spanish with.
All right. Muy bueno. And so then what did you do after college?
Right. So, after college, came back home to Long Island, and I spent a few months looking for work in New York City. So I was a security guard in a marina nearby my house. Finally, I actually got an offer from a military academy called LaSalle Military Academy. I was living in a town called Bayport. So this military academy was maybe 10, 15 miles away, and they offered me a job as a Spanish teacher, also as an English as a second language teacher, because the school had a lot of foreigners that had come to the school to study. And that was my first job. I was there for about 2 years, and my salary was $8,400 a year and a free lunch. That's what I said.
So I was just going to ask you then, what made you decide to get in your line of work? And it sounds like part of it was probably a little better income.
I lived with a cop. Father was in the New York Police Department, NYPD, and he was there for about 38 years. So, we were surrounded by cops. And I even remember my dad was in the motorcycle unit in Brooklyn, motorcycle precinct number 2. And so we spent a little bit of time visiting hospitals, visiting, his fellow cops who had been injured, riding their bikes. So it was basically a cop world. And even, my father joined the Holy Name Society. So we would go to communion breakfasts after church, this NYPD Holy Name Society. So there was a lot of cop stuff in my upbringing. And I think that kind of inspired me to certainly think about law enforcement as a career. Although my father said, he would always say, look, you have a college degree. If you're really serious, maybe you should think about becoming a Fed. That was his advice to me. And that call to becoming a law enforcement just seemed to be in my blood. And I couldn't deny it anymore. And so I finally gave in and kind of followed that path.
Well, it sounds like your father made a big impression on you and the work he did and fellow officers that you encountered there. What was the first agency then you worked with, and what are some of the departments you worked with? And can you tell us some of the assignments you had?
What I can tell you is, coming out of the FBI Academy, I actually put in for the New York office because obviously I'm from New York. And instead, they gave me Newark, New Jersey. And I was a little upset that I got Newark because I was just so gung-ho on going to New York. It was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because in Newark, it was a smaller field office, and I was able to actually get involved and selected to a elite JTTF unit called C10. Had I gone the New York route, I'm not sure that would have happened, and I may have even ended up in the applicant squad, making my bones for 2 years or so and going through that. Instead, I walked right into a high-octane confident, swaggering group of agents that were handling so many fascinating assignments and things that really were impacting the United States at the time that blew me away. I was just so happy, so lucky to land onto the C-10 squad. I mean, they were working everything from Abu Nidal, the PLO, Jewish Defense League, Sikh terrorism, Cuban intelligence. Joanne Chesimard was, she and the Black Liberation Army had gotten involved in the killing of a New Jersey state trooper. We had state troopers on our squad. They were hurt by that. You could feel their hurt. They'd lost a brother trooper. And so we're working all of these cases. Kiki Camarena, Japanese Red Army bomber, they had arrested him on the New Jersey Turnpike with a bomb in his car. He was on his way to delivering the bomb, a U.S. Navy recruiting station in Times Square, New York, with the bomb in the car. And one of our guys got him. So there was so many things happening.
Now, was this pre 9/11?
This was pre 9/11. And this was actually, Gabe, I like to call it the birth of Al-Qaeda in the United States. Because if you remember, people I was following around, surveilling and investigating were the kind of these jihadists that had come out of Afghanistan. They had beaten the Russians. Now they're in our country in New York, New Jersey. They've been trained by the CIA. And now they decide that the enemy is no longer the Russians, but the enemy is Israel and the United States. So, you can imagine what we were looking at. And these were hardcore fundamentalists who would cut your throat in a second if they had their way. If you remember the killing of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was a Jewish activist and kind of a rabble rouser. And he was shot and murdered, killed by Syed Nozer. And so from this shooting, and the New York Police Department said, oh, no, this is an isolated murder. There's no links to terrorism. There's no conspiracy. Well, that wasn't the case. Actually, there were many, many ties to terrorism. All these people around Syed Nozer would go on to actually blow up World Trade Tower in 1993. This group. So these were the guys we were up against, and they were kind of led by these religious cleric called Sheikh Abdul Rahman. He looked like a harmless guy with a pot belly and a Santa Claus type suit that he wore from the Middle East, but all he had to do was give his blessing. They call it a fatwa in Arabic, and that was the green light to murder a rival or kill someone, an opponent.
Then what other agencies did you work at and assignments you had?
Right. So I also worked with an overseas agency, the U.S. Agency for International Development, AID. I was with the Office of Inspector General. I did about 4 years in the States, based in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. And I did several years overseas in America, in Costa Rica and El Salvador. I was actually recruited by former FBI agents, white-collar fraud specialists. They recruited me, and I said, look, I don't have a background in fraud. And they said, no worries, we'll teach you. You can learn it. So, these were my teachers. And, I worked on a number of cases, procurement cases, commodity import cases. You have to remember that AID was dispersing aid all over the globe. And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and not just following fraud or irregularities, anything like that in dispersing of aid. And there was plenty of fraud, believe me, Gabe. But also the person USAID. I worked there for a number of years, and Latin America was a great place. I kind of went up and down Latin America and down into South America. So it was a fascinating experience. And we made a few recoveries. We put some people were heavily fined, went to jail. So a very, very interesting time.
It sounds like it was interesting. So I understand you have a new book that recently came out. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what made you decide to get into writing?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing it up. So, the new book is called A Cop's Son. Obviously, I'm the cop's son. My father was with NYPD, as you know. So this has been out about a month. The subtitle is One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. And so the book is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I talk about this C-10 JTTF terrorism squad. The second part is what I just mentioned with the elite global fraud unit overseas. And the third part is the last agency I landed with, which was the Department of Justice, OIG. I worked in El Paso when the cartels it was kind of their heyday, and I suppose it's still their heyday. But I worked in El Paso, and at the time, we were monitoring Justice Department components, such as the INS, Border Patrol, And these entities, we were watching the cartels bribe several of our gatekeepers, if you will, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
For example, an immigration inspector that for 3 or 4 years waved loads of cocaine and marijuana through his lane at the port of entry, right on the southwest border, had married a Mexican gal who had very, very close ties to the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes organization. So, within less than a year, he was doing favors gradually, and then until he started actually, getting involved with beepers and phone calls and waving stuff in for several years. So we were on people like that. There was a border patrol agent. He was a canine guy, had been doing it for many years, had been actually to the point where he would go over to Juarez in Mexico with the dog and had the dog work with the cartels to run the dog around shipments until the dog could no longer hit on the shipments. So these, it was a cat and mouse game that we were playing with these corrupt federal agents. And, it was not an easy environment because at one time, the cartels had put a bounty on each of our heads, American agents, on the line. So I remember attending the inauguration of Kiki Camarena Center, the El Paso Intelligence Center in El Paso. I was there for the inauguration. I remember Kiki's wife she spoke a little bit. It was a very moving ceremony. Can you imagine that just like a few years later, I'm face to face with the guy that was involved with, and you could see this in the series Narcos Mexico. I'm face to face with this guy who had actually been involved in the murder of Kiki Camarena. And I'm talking to him in Spanish. Now, you know who I'm talking about. This is Miguel Felix Gallardo.
Yeah,
and I'm
the Godfather, the Mexican Godfather, yes.
That's it, El Padrino. So I'm with him, and an interesting guy, and a kind of, you could just look into his eyes and you could just see they're empty and this guy is a killer. You could just tell. But that was at the maximum security prison, the Altiplano there. So I actually got to meet him. I got to meet Eduardo Arellano Felix, who was with, of course, the AFO, Arellano Felix organization, just to be with these guys and, a little chit chat with them. And believe it or not, right after that, I'm actually talking to, but didn't even know who it was. I thought he was just another patient in the infirmary. They were giving us a tour now of the infirmary. And there was this guy. It turned out he was Don Neto.
Fonseca, Fonseca,
Fonseca, yes. Right? Ernesto Fonseca. So, and we're talking about his health. How are you doing, sir? And I'm, not too good. No muy bien. This type of thing. So, very interesting. Again, these experiences I had, but it was also a fascinating time. There was a lot of work, a lot of things going on. And I remember my father came down to visit us in El Paso, and I took him out onto one of these bridges, these land bridges, and he looked across to Juarez, and he saw all the traffic coming in and all the people coming in across the bridge, to do their work and go back to Mexico. And he just looked at me and he said, "Wow, there's 1,000 stories to tell in this city." And we both knew I knew what he was talking about, and I just smiled. Yeah, it was a lot of good work.
I bet. So I was just going to, if you don't mind me asking a little bit, I know it's kind of a sensitive topic, but it's been in the news quite a bit. I would like to get your opinion on all the criticism that's been happening recently with the FBI and other federal agencies, especially the DOJ, by many individuals on all sides of society. And what is your feeling about that? Is the Department of Justice corrupt, or is this people taking a few cases of possible mishaps and then painting everybody with the same brush?
I'm concerned as a former agent. I love the work I did. I love the men and women that I worked with. There was this we had an esprit de corps. We kind of fancied ourselves as possibly the best law enforcement agency in the world. So to see some of the stuff that is going on now it's sad. More than anything else, it's sad. It's concerning. I still keep in touch, Gabe, with I belong to the chapter out here in Los Angeles of former FBI agents. Christopher Wray has come once or twice. He's, at least with us, he's come across very well. He seems to talk well. He dresses well. Other than that, I'm not so sure, and I wonder. As far as my concerns with with what's happening, the perception of what is happening with the FBI, I'm saddened and I'm concerned. As I said, I know that the men and women, the rank and file, are doing a great job, and they just want to do the job, do the right thing, bring people to justice, and go home safe and sound. maybe some of the problems are political and they're up at the top of the agency. But just to give you one example, which really saddens me, and this comes from a person who had some respect for, and a very smart person. But, this person is touting a T-shirt on air called the Fascist Bureau of Intimidation. And, when I hear this, it's very hurtful. It's just not right. You can take your shots at the Bureau. You can second guess them. You can disagree with them. But I don't know, that just seemed to go over the top. It's just very hurtful.
So,
right.
can you tell us a little bit about what are some of your biggest accomplishments? I know you already mentioned a few of those, but if you were to name maybe one or two that you're most proud of, what would those be?
So, you'll see them in the book. Mine is not, I remember somebody contacted me and said, hey, I'll put you on. You wrote a book. I'll put you on. Talk about the biggest case you ever did. And I said, this book is not about the biggest case I ever did. These are human emotions going into cases over, with 3 different agencies that are successes, they're failures, there's tragedy in some of them, there's accomplishment, love, and there's hate. There's a lot of things, moving parts in my book. And I think that's the beauty of the book. But, as far as accomplishments go, 2 or 3 things come to mind. One of them is, I was a supervisor for a number of years. So I take great pride in learning how to be a supervisor, being a supervisor, and looking after my people, taking care of them, trying to give them what they needed to do their work, to make them better people, to kind of give this tone at the top thing, maybe somewhat of a command presence, but always to care about them and their families. I wanted to make sure that they all went home at night. So they did, and I'm grateful for that. So I look back on that as a kind of accomplishment. That's not mentioned in the book, although I think it will come out when you read it. Probably one of the things that stands out for me is when I was with this C-10 squad, I came about some information about, potential sources at a critical time in our history. And it's just one of these things. The chapter is called The Intersection of Luck and Destiny. I looked at this, I think it was an Airtel communication, and it said, look for these people, check them out. And so I remember, it was like a Friday afternoon, and, when most people would be going home, it was kind of late. I said, you know what, I'm going to go find these people. And I did. And, these were Middle Eastern people. I don't know if I told you this, but I had lived in the Middle East for 5 years as a teacher. And as an English teacher for the royal family, Saudi Arabian royal family. So I knew basic Arabic and I knew the culture. And so when I met these Middle Easterners, I just acted like I would if I was in their country. I small talk in Arabic, all the gestures were typical Middle East. And I thought, kind of made for this. This is my experience with these people. So I didn't frighten them. I was able to communicate with them. And I just said, hey, join the A-team. You guys, welcome to our country. And, here's a chance for you to kind of pay this country that has taken you into its bosom. And maybe this is the time where you can help us. And I don't want to get into it too much because I have to protect sources and methods. And, I have to share this with another agent in my squad who was instrumental in pushing this through. But this encounter changed things in ways that shocked me. But it was good, all good.
All right. Well, we're
I'll leave
excited to learn more in your book. There's usually a lot more behind the scenes happening than most people know. They see the headlines and they don't realize how much more there is to situations. So thank you for that. And then what would you say were some of your greatest hurdles? Is there anything that stands out in your mind that, man, that was pretty rough times?
Yeah, I think about law enforcement, as you know, every day is different. You can sometimes the work is not so complicated, not so sophisticated, but it's sometimes the greatest impediments turn out to be some of the people around you at times where, people have issues, you have to respond to those issues. You have to get everybody working on the same page. You can't play favorites. So I think in operating an office and running an office, and when I first ran an office, I think these are the things that I had to overcome. You go into a new office and they don't know who you are, so you're feeling each other out. The people are going to test you. That's human nature. See how much they can get away with, that type of thing. But in the end, I think if you're fair and you show them that you have empathy and you really care about them and their family, I think that they let you into the tent. They trust you, and that's the best way to run an office. And so I think that was a hurdle for me in one of my offices, but we got through it and it worked out okay.
Well, I definitely know, being a supervisor myself, how challenging it can be sometimes. I've always found there were certain individuals who you never had to say anything to. I mean, they were just above and beyond, showed up early. Sometimes you'd have to tell them, hey, it's time to go home. You can't stay anymore. I can't afford the overtime. Those kind of guys didn't take advantage of the lunch breaks or their personal breaks. And then you had other people. It's like pulling teeth sometimes, constantly pushing the envelope. But I would say the vast majority of people I supervised were probably in between that spectrum. 90% were in between and just did their decent job and tried to do the right thing and aim for criminal justice. And that was pretty enjoyable. It was only a few people that gave me headaches, but finding ways to motivate them sometimes, yes, that was very, very much challenging. But I would always remember back when I had some good supervisors and how they would handle it. And I also remember some poor supervisors and remember trying not to be like them.
Exactly. That's not the way I'm going to do it. You learn from those supervisors. You're absolutely right. And you have, sometimes you have a rabbi that is looking out for you, and you look up to that man or woman and you say, wow, I'm going to emulate you. You do it right. I like what you're doing.
So, Ken, is there anything else you'd like to add today before we close?
This has been a wonderful experience, Gabe. I love your podcast. There's a special chapter at the end of my book that talks about what young men and women should consider if they want to go into this type of career. And I lay it out for them, and I think they'll like it. I talk about various things that I think would help them make that decision. And, ours is a peculiar profession. It's not for everyone.
Very good. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. And young people, or older people, maybe in a career change, if you're thinking about getting into law enforcement, read Kenneth Strange's new book. I'm sure it will help you and decide on whether that is a good career path for you or not. A Cop's Son. So thank you for being on the show, sir, and stay in touch.
Thank you, Gabe, and stay safe.